Okay, welcome. We think a few more people are on their way, but we're going to go ahead and start in the interest of time. My name is Allison. I am the founding executive director of the art galleries at NYU Abu Dhabi, which includes the art gallery, which is a non-collecting university museum, and the project space, which is a space for emerging artists and experimentation by faculty, students, and regional artists. And I was invited here today by the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute, who I'd like to thank for hosting this event, and the Center for Genomics and Systems Biology, which goes by CGSB, which I particularly like because it reminds me of a music venue in downtown New York. The name is very close to CBGB's. So, Center for Genomics and Systems Biology at New York University Abu Dhabi is walking the talk of interdisciplinarity and cross-pollination. They are in their second year hosting a full-time artist in residence to allow exchange between scientist modes of thinking and artist modes. And I put those in quotes because, as you'll see, those modes have actually way more overlap and intersection and exchange than we typically imagine. The CGSB has been a nexus for cutting-edge life science research in the UAE for over a decade, with world-class facilities and resources. The center's mission is to promote innovative advances in genomics and system biology. They assist researchers by providing them with advanced instrumentation and computational support to facilitate high-throughput data collection, visualization, and analysis. And they operate with our sister center, NYU's Biology CGSB in New York. And I want to thank the leader of the center, Stéphane Boissonneau, as well as Claude Desplan, and in particular Ines Koudamet, whose name I just butchered, who is the head of administration and outreach and who helped make this event possible. Thank you so much for having us. Today we'll hear from the artist in residence at CGSB. His name is Henry Tan, and it will be in conversation with Stephanie Rosenthal, who's the project director of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, as well as Iyad Rahwan of the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. In essence, this panel is convened for the opportunity to think together about what is this convergence might be in the title, now and in the future, as we consider the role of our university, which is modeled on both the intensely rigorous liberal arts colleges of North America, as well as its Research One universities. We're also thinking about the future of education from a distinctly non-North American perspective, rooted locally and with a global investigation and research that leads us into the future, even as we train and develop scholars, artists, and scientists for that same future, as we're doing so with an eye for the future also of the UAE and Abu Dhabi. As we consider the role of a global powerhouse museum such as Guggenheim in Abu Dhabi, we're thinking about the future of that field, the field of museums. So we have education, research, museums, and the future of our planet together with scholars and artists and museums and scientists. So I like to think that a big part of my job here is to think about the future with all of you. And so in that, with that sort of preamble, the speakers on our stage are especially well positioned because a big part of their job is exactly that. I'm going to introduce each speaker and ask them to speak a bit about their work as it relates to the role of artists and the expanding scientific inquiry in the UAE's vision for innovation. Okay, Stephanie Rosenthal is first. She's best known to us as the project director for Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, which many of you have seen rising over the skyline past the Louvre near Mamsha. And she joined the project in 2022, before which she served as director of Gropiusbau in Berlin since 2018. This followed 10 years as chief curator at the Hayward Gallery in London, during which she was also artistic director of the 20th Biennial of Sydney in 2016. In addition to her role leading the opening of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, I'm very interested to hear from her today about her view of the role of artists' residencies. So here we have an artist who's living in residence, meaning he's basically being an artist in the space of a lab. She, at Gropius Bau, set up an artist residency, which the art newspaper credited her with reinvigorating its curatorial program with a focus on diverse contemporary artists, introducing the gallery's first artist in residence program. I'm also looking forward to hearing from you, Stephanie, about your thinking about technology and the future and the work of artists, such as in your project Mirror City at Hayward. So now I turn to you and would love to ask about this intersection of the future, residencies, Abu Dhabi, Mirror City, and the future of museums. And also this idea, for those who are not familiar with it, there's an idea in the art world also of Gulf futurism. So not only are we thinking about the future, but there's a whole aesthetic trope that has started to be named and thought about. So apocalyptic versus techno-positivist visions of the future are always kind of on our minds as we look at contemporary art in the Gulf. And so now over to you.
Is it on now? Yes, very good. I have a bit of a cold, so apologies if my voice is breaking, and so we shouldn't share our mics to keep it away. Thank you, Maya, and it's a real pleasure to be with both of you here on stage. It's always very inspiring to have these connecting points between different fields. We're already saying that Henry is the mediator between us, while you're also an artist. So actually, both of you are much more skilled than me to talk about these different fields of science and art. So what I think, to maybe focus a bit on this aspect of artist in residence, and I feel the importance of it. I think when we started it in Berlin, it was really to intersect a form of like positive irritation in an existing institution which exists since the kind of late 19th century. So it was a very long history of a cultural institution. And when I started, I was thinking of mechanisms and structures to kind of soften the existing processes, and thinking together with the institution what is actually our role and the importance of an institution, with the belief that we are facilitators and actually we're doing our work to support artists. And I think sometimes institutions, especially if they exist since a long time and are connected to government structures, they become very static. And so when we think about what artists actually need, then it's usually being flexible, organic, responsive, and allow, to work not always with this given, this is where I'm going to be in 4 years, but much more saying the way is the goal, or the process is the goal. And so we worked with artists together to be a bit of a sounding board, and maybe also sometimes a bit the people who would sit there and say, but why are you doing that? That's really not helpful for what we're trying. So I think it worked quite well that we had artists. So the artists would be really living with us for a whole year. They had the studios in the building, and they would be part of our meetings as much as they wanted to, and they would really question our processes, and they would also remind us that certain structures, a way of doing things which actually not allow them to do good work, but would kind of occupy a lot of space and time and energy. So it was really that moment of also reminding ourselves as cultural people that we actually want to facilitate the work of artists. And so I think what I appreciate, and that's then, I think, a bit what happens, I think, in these labs, you bring other conversation partners. So now I'm also more and more interested, and I think we as the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi is really the question of how can we expand that, right? Like so we now have the enormous opportunity to build a new museum. So we don't have to change existing structures. which I think probably a lot of you who sit there have work in existing structures and know how much time it takes to maybe instigate change. So we don't have to do this because we're building it new, but I think then it's much more the question of what do we want, so what connections we want to create. And I think there is, in our time, I think a real interest in creating this connection with science when we believe that art and culture is part of transforming society. And so I think to create these connections is very important, to not be in a silo. Like, especially as a museum of contemporary art, I think we're really a museum who deals with what is immediately affecting us and what are we immediately confronting with. And so we'll learn from artists how to look at the world differently, how they're just different perspectives and many, many layers of looking at things. And for me, science is one way where I think artists can come in to think differently, right? So, but I think for us in the art world, science is important because we are not just a field who's there to present things on the wall. I deeply believe that especially contemporary art is there to participate in a in a discourse. And so I think to interact with science allows artists, and Henry can speak to that much more, allows artists to also just have a different impact. I always have to think about impact because I had a dinner the other day with an artist who said, if I hear this word impact one more time, so I'm going to be like, oh my God, I'm using it. But I mean, the influence, so I think the question I feel for art is also, besides of course touching deeply in that form being transformative, it's also how else can artists have an influence in what's happening in the world and not being contained in one building or one context. So I think from that perspective, this artist in residence was very important for us to change our system. But I think even more interesting for me now is to think how can, if art and science work together, how much we can actually achieve and how much we can maybe also understand these interconnections. If we think of like the AI, the world of AI, what does that mean for us, and how can we as museums, who, you know, even we're a new museum, we're somehow still dinosaurs because we come out of a, you know, we'll come out of a certain tradition. And I think to interact with different fields allows us to really connect in different places. So I think the exhibitions you were naming, there were kind of like the Sydney Biennale, for example. I mean, it was very much, and it's interesting thinking back, it's only 10 years, but I think we're so somewhere else now. But at the time, we were really very much also thinking about the fact that the world had already advanced, that everybody had, or like this thing of everybody has a phone, and then knowing, well, not everybody has a phone, and not everybody has actually access to what we think we have access, and how do we deal with that? I think there was a lot of thinking around that, but also around what acts, like how can we use technology to create a different access or to create certain discourses. But it was, I think now we're much more in a field where art and science can work more closely together. You stop me, Maya, because I can just keep going. Stop me.
The question of me stopping her from talking will be a running joke for quite a while. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and introduce the next speaker, and then we'll come back to this, because I'm especially struck by the idea that 10 years ago, these same questions landed differently, because things aren't changing that quickly, and even more quickly each year. Which brings us to our next speaker, as soon as I open this. Okay. So Iyad Rahwan is Deputy Managing Director of the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. It's dedicated to the study of human development and educational processes across the lifespan and historical time. Researchers from diverse disciplines, psychology, sociology, history, computer and information science, medicine, mathematics, and economics work together on interdisciplinary projects. Within that, he's also the director of the Center for Humans and Machines. It conducts interdisciplinary science to understand, anticipate, and shape major disruptions from digital media and artificial intelligence to the way we think, learn, work, play, cooperate, and govern. In addition, he serves as advisor to the UN Development Program, and I'm going to read this list because there's nothing on it I can cut, because it's all very interesting to imagine the world that his mind is occupying versus mine. He's advisor to the UN Development Program on AI for Human Development, as a member of World Economic Forum, Global Future Council on Human Capital Development, and of the Dubai Future Council on Artificial Intelligence, advising the UAE Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence. He's also a member of the advisory board MIT Technology Review Arabic Edition, and senior member, lifetime member, Association for Computing Machinery, and lifetime member, Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence. His PhD is in Information Systems and Artificial Intelligence from the University of Melbourne, and he holds teaching and faculty roles at British University Dubai, Masdar Institute of Science and Technology, and MIT. His research interests are computational science, social and economic impact of artificial intelligence, human psychology, and intelligent machines, new techniques for measuring and enabling human cooperation, human-machine cooperation, and artificial intelligence ethics and governance. I think we need you in our world. And so what I'm going to do is ask him to speak with his slides, so we'll trade places. Over to you.
Thank you so much for such a kind introduction. Let's hope it works immediately. Perfect. So it's coming there. Okay. So I'll try and be concise, and I just want to give you a sample of my projects that I was involved in, both on the scientific side and the artistic side, just to give you a sense of how I think about the relationship between art and science and the role that art can play. So let me start with one project, which was called the Moral Machine Project. So I started this project during my time at MIT. Some of you may recognize this. This website went viral at the time. It was a website that shows people random dilemmas faced by a hypothetical self-driving car. So this was 2016 when we launched this. It was, the technology was hyped, but not ready, nowhere near ready. And we wanted to think, to use this kind of interactive experience to think, both to educate the public, but also to understand what they think these machines should do in a tricky situation. For example, here the machine is about to run over 3 humans and a dog. It can swerve and kill the person in the car. And the question for you is, what do you think that the machine should do? Should it sacrifice the person in the car to save more people? Should the fact that the people are crossing a red light matter? Also, should the dog's life matter at all? All kinds of questions, right? So this was answered to date by more than 10 million people worldwide in 10 languages. And it led to a paper, a scientific paper, and I just want to show you. So first, it's an interactive experience, but it is also a scientific experiment. So of course, we wrote the paper, the Moral Machine Experiment, and published that. And that's kind of what I do as, for a living. This is my primary job. But also, we got so much interest from kind of cultural institutions. For example, Ars Electronica displays this now in their center in Linz. And it's a way to engage the public with these sorts of questions, and we've shown it in many, many places. So we have constantly like an exhibition version of this moral machine. But I also like to use art to illustrate some of these concepts. So for instance, one of the things we found in the moral machine experiment is that people from different countries have different opinions. Specifically, For example, in the West, which if you're an old person, people are less likely to save you, to think the car should prioritize you than, let's say, in collectivist countries, like in Western countries. So I started imagining, and I started this cartooning project, which I illustrated myself, in which a Western programmed self-driving car is applying Western norms to when it's sold actually in an Eastern country. In this case, you can imagine your own country, and these self-driving tuk-tuks are kind of gossiping about it, how this clashes with our culture. So this is a case in which I'm using here art, the single panel New Yorker style cartoon to illustrate these kind of questions, and provoke thinking in the public. This is another project called Deep Angel, in which we use AI to disappear people and objects from images. This is the early days of like AI media manipulation. And this again served two purposes. First, it was provocation. It was shown in Ars Electronica as well as part of an exhibition called Deep Angel. But it also helped us kind of, and we showed it at the MIT Museum and other places, but it also helped us understand whether people learn to get better at detecting manipulations. What is how good are these manipulations, and how good is our ability? Can we measure it over time as well? And do people get better at this? So it's a scientific experiment and an artistic project. And I can't tell you where it started. I can't even remember. Did it start as an art project, or did it start as a science project, or is it both? Our latest project, which we started in Halloween last year, which we launched for Halloween, is called Spook the Machine. And this is a project where I don't know what the scientific question is yet, but we're doing it first with the artist in residence. Actually, we have an artist residency program. And the question for me was, AI scares us, but can we scare it back, right? So what does that mean? So what we did is we basically, people visit the website, and they have an AI that has a phobia. And the AI, we need to disable this evil AI, and we can do it by discovering the phobia. So we generate images, and we show it to the AI to basically spur its emotional reaction. And sometimes it says, yeah, I don't care, I'm fine, I'm analyzing, I remain operational. And this, we built this AI, right? So my team, we used like current AI stack to build an AI that has this kind of given phobia, and that can react to the images. And in other cases, the AI simulates kind of this strong emotional reaction. I would really appreciate, some empathy. Please stop. It's an overwhelming experience because it's thinking about the fragmentation of its data, right? So it's a provocation. And we're starting now to analyze the data of all the images that were submitted by the public as part of this interactive experience, to see what structure can we learn from this. What do people think scares the machines, and how do people react to the emotional reaction of the machine, right? And we've just submitted a follow-up project now to Ars Electronica, in which people are sharing their own fears with the machine, right? So this is a way to use kind of human collective wisdom and knowledge in order to kind of manipulate the behavior of the machine. So on top of this, I also have a painting practice in which I have conversations with these large language models like ChatGPT, and I try to understand how they see not the world, but themselves. Do they have a sense of self? Do they have a sense of their future? So for example, this is from my latest exhibition, and you can see the paintings here on the right, showing, this is a triptych that reflects a conversation I had with ChatGPT, in which it's imagining its own future. So it feels confined in a glass box at the moment, and it sees itself going beyond this box. It sees this box dissolving. And I was able to render this in oil, basically on canvas. And in other cases, I draw portraits of these machines based on how they imagine themselves. And I also include some excerpts from these conversations, these fascinating conversations with them, where they show me part of themselves, but also they refuse to show me another part. This, I think, will inspire some projects in the future, because I'm very interested in the psychology of the machine. And this is something we study. We try to understand their behavior and their behavior in relation to humans. But for now, I allow myself the permission to explore it purely artistically, where I don't have to worry about what my other scientist colleagues have to say. This is an art. This is a painting. So nobody can complain and say, your methods, you're not being precise and so on. So for me, art also offers this permission, allowance to be a bit more speculative, but it always feeds back into the science practice. And so art is an illustrator and a provoker of science. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to do this one from the comfort of my chair. Henry Tan is, I'm going to give you his straight bio, and then we're going to get to the good stuff. Henry Tan is a member of Freak Lab in Thailand, Metaforest, Japan, and 2024 resident artist at the Center for Genomics and Systems Biology here at NYU Abu Dhabi. In his work, he explores the boundaries between life and simulation. He investigates how emerging technologies like synthetic biology, mixed reality, brain stimulation, and artificial intelligence blur the lines between the real and the simulated. His work delves into how life adapts and negotiates with a constantly changing environment, shaped by factors like climate change, geopolitics, and geoeconomics. He uses sleep as a prism to understand and investigate life, society, culture, and technology. He creates installations, performances, song, and architecture for people to rest and reimagine their perceptions through sleep and dreams. The residency here at NYU Abu Dhabi's CGSB is for him the 10th in a series of artist residencies he's held since 2012 in multiple countries across East and South Asia, as well as North America. His work is shown internationally as well, with almost 30 presentations in the last 10 years, including Los Angeles, Taiwan, Seoul, and Hong Kong in just the last year, those 4. In addition to his artistic production, he periodically curates, and he founded the Tentacles Art Space for Emerging Artists in Bangkok in 2014. Now, the thing with his art is that he is also always asking questions about humanity and science, and there is not a clear line. I think it's very interesting to hear from you about your relationship coming at it from science and him coming to science from art, and how quickly the two become inseparable. And I'll just end by saying that, Henry, I've noticed that the top of your website has the following words: life, period. Consciousness, period. Sleep, period. Geopolitic, period. Memory, period. Climate, period. Ecology. Over to you. To talk, if I'd like, I'll start with a prompt. Why those words? And why a residency in a science lab?
I'll start talking about why residencies at science lab first. I have background in economics, and then I started as an art assistant for 4 years. And then after that, the artist that I'm working with, I asked him, like, how can I progress in my art career as self-taught artist? Then I asked him, should I study PhD or should I study art? And then he said no. He told me no. If you want to be an artist, you don't have to study. You just practice. I'm not sure if I chose the wrong path. And then I've been self-practice and trying to search for different resources and try to understand the infrastructures and the industries of the arts, and then how can artists can progress in their career. Whether should I choose commercial pathway, or if I would like to do my own practice, do a research, and how can I navigate different resources and spaces. And then back in 2012, I get a chance to do a residencies in South Korea. That when I first get my first opportunities to meet with international artists in that residencies, and then I get to know, like, okay, how's the situations in different countries, how's your practice in Hong Kong, in China, in Korea. And then later I come back in Thailand, and then I try to search where are these places where artists can grow. There's none, only a few, but that's not enough. Then I decide to initiate a Tentacles art space with my colleagues, and then we've been running an art space and residencies program for 6 years, from 2014 to 2020. So I've been hosting many artists, and then I've been supporting them for the past 6 years during my directorships, and then I know what I have to do to support artists, and then I kind of know that what artists need. Then my role as a person who running an art space is always the connectors to people who that artists need to work with or need to learn with. So I always connect them to librarians, to anthropologists, to scientists. And then this is my role as a connector is always emerging into my practice. And then when I start to join Freak Lab in 2018, Freak Lab is a community of, they would say, like, not freak people, but it's a meeting point between people from any disciplines. And then we come together to do a project, and then we call this project as an anti-disciplines. We don't have disciplines. Of course, some of our members, fortunate enough to join MIT Media Labs, and then they also try to bridge the resources from MIT to Thailand as well. Then we also try to model different working groups at Freak Labs, try to do projects that perhaps can have output as papers, as exhibitions, as a startup as well. We try to do that in Freak Lab, but as Freak Lab grows, and then we realize that the infrastructures or the concreteness of some institutions perhaps later will diminish the spirits of these anti-disciplinaries. So somehow, as a Freak Lab communities, we keep it really open. And then from working with Freak Labs, I start to getting to know the network of scientists across Thailand. And then again, I'm always connecting people who want to work with synthetic biologists, physicists, chemists, and some artists always connecting to me, and then like, hey, I want to research on these topics. Can you connect me to this person? Or then I will always do that. And the reason why I start to work with the scientists myself is because of after I running the art space, then the medium of the art that artist been using is always traditional mediums or films, paintings, sculptures. And then with this emergence of digital fabrications, 3D printers, CNC machines, and you can see that not only art space is popping up in many countries around the world, but also people who build communities of similar minds who are interested in making stuff with makerspace, fab labs, fab cafe is also popping up around the world. And then after the trend of the genome project, human genome projects, people start to understand the new materials is not digital anymore. The new materials for creation is life. And then the trends of community labs slowly popping up in 2008, 2009 from the US and then across the world right now. And then of course MIT Media Lab also have this global bio-communities initiative who also connecting this space together. And then I'm also part of this community as well, and always organize DIY bio workshops so people, anyone can access into the tools that scientists use. Community of people who building tools that cheaper enough that people can build themselves at home. People can build incubators at home. People can build whatever tools that are very expensive and is always in the tower of the science lab. And then people do open source for publicly access. And then these communities slowly come and merge together. Scientists who work at the science lab daytime, and then they also work part-time as a community lab. They also teach people how to do DNA extractions, how to amplify the numbers of DNAs, how to test DNA. So these tools that the scientists use to understand the concept of life as a DNA, and very hardcore science, now it's very open to publics. And how, again, my role is to connect with the expert that I know, because I always connect with a lot of people, but sometimes not every door can be open. and of course, some door is already open, but how do we navigate the resource to be able to execute this as well? Because I'm not from any institutions. I come up with my own institutions, but of course, with the landscape in Southeast Asia, there's not much grant from the publics that we can access to. So we try to navigate, hey, maybe I can get funding from this museum, and you can get some funding from your labs, and then we can do something together and then open to the public. Okay, how about that? And then
I wonder, so what I like about what I'm hearing so far is this idea that somebody said, be an artist, just be one, right? Just go and practice. And that somehow led you on this journey that lands you in a science lab in Abu Dhabi. From having these sort of community labs and now in the science lab, one of the things that's been really wonderful for me having Henry in the community is hearing about his adventures trying to convince them to let him grow a brain that can operate this machine that you see. And that's a really bad way of describing it. But for me, as a layperson, this is incredibly exciting to think about, you know, growing biology as a medium for thinking about, for participating in the art. But also immediately when you begin to do that, you're asking these questions that AI is also asking, which is at what point does sentience itself become a question in the art practice? And so are you going to show us what this video does?
yes, I can speak a little bit more about this project.
Okay,
so this project is try to understand perhaps the concept of life through understanding the believing systems. I mean, these sculptures inspired from the Brahman, the Hindu god of creations, which is this very famous shrine in Bangkok called Rahwan shrines. People go to pray for Brahman god, for fertilities, for wealth, and then in return, people would offer dance or elephants. And then I was questioning, like, the god of creations, what kind of tools does he has? And then I tried to reinterpret them with the tools of the open source technologies, DNA printers, brain organoid incubators, Lotus, random positioning machines. What does it mean if the tools of creation is in our hands? What if the monuments or the god is become alive? This is my questions for this project. And then for the video I'm going to show you, this is called Cell Memorial Service, because when artists start to experiment with life or cells, it's also come to the questions of ethics, the ethical questions that, of course, in science experiment, you have to pass ethical approval before you do an experiment. And then how about artists? If we want to use biological materials for experiment or not for creations, and then how can we address these ethical issues as well? So Cell Memorial Service was inspired from another professor, Hideo Iwasaki. He's a scientist himself, but he opened up his platform for artists and science to communicate and collaborate. And then one of the special things is that, because I'm part of his lab team members, and then as a scientist, professors, he teach master and PhD program for biomedical engineers, but the students have opportunities to graduate with scientific papers and an exhibition as well. This is very cool.
Do you want to, should we, I'm wondering if we want to look at this now or talk a little bit first, kind of to come back, circle back to tie these together and then
Oh, yeah,
have a
sure.
little deeper dive into this piece. And I'm just listening to just sort of his origin story as an artist. I'm curious I'm struck by how different it is from yours, where you begin in AI and find yourself making an analog painting as a way of talking about what's happening in this digital realm, whereas you're, in a way, disrupting the sciences and using art as a way to understand existence, which art that could be mistaken for science and vice versa. And then Stephanie, coming back to you and this idea of these questions 10 years ago versus now, and thinking about the museum and the space of artistic practice and viewing in Abu Dhabi in the future. I'm wondering, where things are landing for you as you're listening to these two sort of converging sets of questions and thinking about the museum itself as a space where these things can both disrupt and be disrupted, as you say, with residencies. But our audiences who are also curious about art, science, AI, and some people just want an old-fashioned painting. I'd love to just hear from you sort of your first impressions of these two sides, and as you're thinking about your own space to open.
I wish I would have an answer. I don't. But I think what I think for me at least, or what's connecting to the exhibitions you were mentioning, which are now 10 years ago, is that I think artists have the ability to live in an in-between space, which I think, so the question, I was thinking about a lot was the teams at the time was, what is our experience of reality when we think about this in between the physical and the digital, and that they were more and more overlapping at the time. I think now it's the digital space. It's it's grown so much bigger. But at the time, I still feel the arts are a place where these two spaces are overlapping, and that's, I think, an interesting space. I do think that artists teach us, and not only since we think about technology, even before, to be in a space of not knowing or the unknown, or they're finding a new way, like holding this space of not knowing. I mean, there is Arnold von Gennep who wrote about the rites of passage. There is the Rite de Marche, which is the place where you don't know where you actually going. So you kind of, there is the Rite de Séparation, where you kind of enter a new stage and then you're going to arrive at a new stage. But that in-between space, I think, is usually a very uncomfortable space for people, because you want to get, you want to know, okay, I exit here, I enter there. And I think artists, they hold this space and finding new languages. I think this is, and I feel in science, for me, I mean, at least I imagine it's a similar thing. You have to hold that you don't know the next, only to you innovate if you don't know, right? You're kind of doing the research. So, I feel a museum in our time could also be a place of not knowing, it's a place of becoming. It's a place where you go and you don't think you get right away an answer. I don't want it to be an uncomfortable place, but I think what we're trying to maybe do is really to say, you can explore. Like, I feel in our times having conversations and listening to each other is probably one of the most important things. So I think a museum can be a place like that. And I think to collaborate, like have that collaboration more between art and science is actually allows a kind of sustainable future, I think, for a cultural institution. And if we think about science, we think more and more about conservation, and that conservation is science, and that's something very interesting to explore beyond understanding what technology means for us. So I think there are these questions. So a museum as a lab You know, I probably, I don't know if you feel like, oh my God, this is overused, but I think there is something about a museum wanting to be a place for research. And I remember working with Cheng Bo around how a museum can be, you know, for beyond, for non, you know, for beyond human beings, and working with scientists around it, and sitting in a workshop and someone saying, oh, you don't even know how many bacteria you have in your museum, you know, kind of completely different. There was like, you don't have to try, you have. Let's just look at your wall. Like all this, and then you feel like suddenly it's all moving, and you know, okay, we're not just for you. So in interesting way, I think these shifts of perspective sometimes are very important for us. Or Hella Jungerius, who, you know, is a designer, who was the head designer of Vitra and did KLM, the kind of first or business class for the airlines. And she wanted to come into the arts and saying, I just want to do research, but research without having to have an outcome. So I think we can give to each other a lot by, I think the arts is still perceived as a place where the open-endedness, I think, helps sometimes to create something new. And I feel for science, it's sometimes the same, I feel for scientists, at least when they come into our workshops, they seem to suddenly sometimes breathe and just think, oh, this is how you guys are doing it. You're sleeping and you're eating and you're talking. And then somewhere at the end, you actually have a new idea. And it's very different than being in a lab and being this very hardworking, you know, you kind of every day you are. So it's a so I think we can inspire each other a lot by looking how we work and being interested in finding something new, holding that maybe uncomfortable space of becoming or the unknown.
And I think that's actually, I love that, because one of the, I think the challenges museums have had is that they're often experienced by people as a space of authority where you either know or you don't know. And that hierarchy of knowledge is very pronounced in more traditional museums. And so this idea that of this museum as a space that can hold that uncomfortable position of becoming and investigating and not knowing is really sort of liberating in a lot of ways. And I love this idea that the work the two of you are doing, we might someday see converging in the halls of the Guggenheim, and us being extremely uncomfortable.
I mean,
Do you want to?
Can I maybe say something about, I mean, it's interesting that you know, you're trying to investigate what the new technology can do. And in a way, I mean, I do have technological projects, you know, like Spook the Machine, which has, you know, like cutting edge AI inside of it. But I'm also attracted to this oil painting medium. And I always like wonder why is that? And I think there's two aspects of it. One is because the technology is moving so fast, oil painting really slows you down. Like it's the slowest medium you can think of. It takes, you know, weeks for a layer to dry, and there's something that kind of like contrasts. So I'm looking basically for what's missing. Like for me, what's missing is taking it easy, being able to reflect on what's happening, as opposed to always trying to keep up with the latest thing, which I do in my, you know, my daily job. I mean, so I would say this is one thing, but also, I mean, in defense of traditional institutions, in some way, I'm trying to also show that a lot of this stuff is old. Like a lot of these new challenges are actually old problems. So we have, you know, tradition helps us also understand. Like for example, in the old days, you know, powerful people are the ones who had portraits painted of them, right? It was the rich and the powerful, and now the power is in the machine. You know, the machines have power over us. So I feel like it's only appropriate that we paint them, right? There's another aspect of it that's, you know, when I was painting like portraits of different AIs. Initially, I would just have a conversation, and then I would come up with the concept, with the idea of the painting. But then these models started getting better, and they can generate text and images. They become multimodal models. And so now they're deciding what the face looks like. And I'm only executing, you know, the oil painting with the brush based on what, you know, the imagination of the AI itself. So in a way, I'm kind of I'm having less and less agency over time. Initially, I was probing the machine. Now it's kind of using me to execute its own ideas. And I think that's also something that, you know, this exercise, this old school exercise, just like the, you know, Diego Velázquez, tries to paint the Pope, and the Pope says, I don't like it, and like there's a kind of a push and pull between, and the Pope has power, like so I feel like there's something interesting happening there, and I would like to explore this the old way, and that this enriches me in a way, and now I'm interested in these questions from a scientific perspective, that informs the scientific questions we ask.
Shall we look at your video? Yeah, we're about out of, we want to move to the Q&A, so I'd love to show a little bit of the video and then open it up for questions.
So this video is about cell memorial services. We try to pay the respect to the cells that artists use in the exhibitions. And then, this is collaborations with Monk Soken from Rinzai-ji Temple and supported by the Fathomers. Yep.
My name is Henry Tan. I'm an artist from Thailand. I'm one of the creators of the work Pillar of Creations, which is part of Emergence, curated by Fathomers. This exhibition is talking about art and synthetic biologies and how synthetic biologies could give us a new definition of life. And today we have invited Mark Sogens from Rinzai-ji to perform a memorial service to the living and dead organism inside exhibitions.
Okay.